Hi there, this video is a quick look at the game Europe Engulfed by GMT Games. From 2003. It was designed by Rick Young and Jesse Evans. This is just going to be a quick look because this is I'm playing this as part of my effort to get through all my unplayed games, which is going on nicely, and I generally record something on them, but sometimes I play a game where I can't really seem to get to the hang of it, or some games I just don't get on with at all, and I just sort of pass over them video wise. Others I might think they're a good game, but I can't really, it's not a game for me, and this is in that category. I thought I'd do a video because it might seem like I only ever post sort of positive videos, so I just thought, just to show a bit of a different side of how things can be with games with me, just do a really quick look at this essentially. So what is it? So it's the European Theatre of Operations in World War II, and you get a nice cardboard board. It's a bit warpy, so I'm holding it down with clips. You could cover it with a heavy plexi otherwise, and you get tons of blocks. So you get about 300 of these 2 centimetre square blocks, about 2/3 of a centimetre thick, and it's a lot of blockage. So I've got all of these and all of these in here, and the upshot of this game for me was I originally posted it for sale after my quick play just now for €65, and then I figured out, well, if I wanted to get this many blocks to use for like print and play games or tinkering my own designs and so forth, it's going to cost me half of that just to get the blocks. So I thought I might just keep this game for components instead. Maybe someone might want to play it with me one day, in which case I'll be happy to give it a go, but not for one main reason. None of these reasons. The first good thing about it is the rule book. It's a fairly short rule book. What we've got 24 pages, including the front and back cover, and that is everything. That's the European Theatre of Operations. And have a look at the charts and tables. You have a summary of hit bonuses. That's you roll dice for hits on attack and defence. You have a strategic movement chart. You have a basic production and costs to build charts. Then you have a U-boat loss table. There's also a couple of tables up there which are to do with the anti-submarine warfare and U-boat attack tables. So those 3 tables combined effectively perform a lot of the strategic warfare which will be performed against the Allies, essentially. German U-boat attacks, anti-submarine attacks, and then against shipping. There's also bombing that can happen. You have a general information track here which records things like flak levels, fighter points and bomber points for the respective sides. So you have the Axis and the Allies, and again that's just going to be used in a very simple fashion, rolling 1 or 2 dice a turn in the strategic warfare phase and strategic warfare segment in the production phase. Just a quick roll of 1 or 2 dice, and you deduct some build points. Then you get the turn track, and it's 2 months per turn from 1939 up to 1944. There's also Patton's fantasy scenario where you can pit the sort of Western Allies against the Soviets after the war's end. You get large spaces. So for example, Poland is divided into 4 spaces, I believe, and Russia, you can see, has quite large space like that. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces through to Stalingrad, and you can go all the way down to Baku there. These are important points on the map. Factories. Obviously production is very important. You have your basic production, then you can gain some of those points in production from territories you conquer. sequence of play is short and sweet. You determine weather, and there's 3 separate weather zones. Then the exercise, they determine supply, they produce, which is by computing the works, that's the build points, resolving strategic warfare, and there's any naval units you always have to maintain, you don't have to maintain other units, and then the rest you just spend. So these are all the unit types, essentially: infantry, cavalry, armour, airborne, field fortifications, those are the land ones. The blocks are essentially armour and infantry, and there's just a few cavalry blocks. Then you've got ground support units, that's these fellows, so these can be used multiple times, they just give a benefit on attack. One of these, a hit bonus for 1 unit for every one of those you have. Then your fighter points, bomb points, flag improvement, U-boats, navals, ASW, those are all to do with the strategic warfare. Naval points are also important, you just throw them down in a sea. So you've got the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Baltic Sea, and then they don't actually fight each other. Oh no, I think they can do, but you're not sort of moving a fleet and attacking that fleet, and then that one's going to get trashed. Essentially, what they're used for is for supply and transport. And if, say, he decides to transport some units through the Atlantic Ocean, the number of these will determine the chance of interdiction of those units. So say he transports a 4 strength block over the Atlantic Ocean, these will roll. There's 5 there, they will get a roll according to the amount of 5, and they will knock off some pips or all of the pips off that block as it's transported. So you see, it's very short and sweet. With the Navy, again, like with the air support, you've got ground support, and then you've got the air abstracted there for strategic warfare. Then initial operational movement. Then everyone moves 1 space, if you like. You move into the enemy space to attack. Cavalry and armour can move 2 spaces, and the ground supports can move 2 spaces. They can also hop over on these routes. So you can, if you're invading Malta, you can send ground support to do that, and you can send ground support from Tunisia to Sicily, and then next turn they can move 2 spaces up like that. Then you have breakthrough phases. Now this is the sort of the simple beauty of the game, is these things called special actions. So a special action costs 5 points. Now infantry costs 1, armour costs 2 per step, except the initial step always costs double. So special actions are not too expensive, but they're fairly expensive when you consider that, say, Italy only gets 10 base production. They can only buy 2 of those a turn, and then they would be able to buy nothing else. With a special action, what it means is you get some options. So, for example, if you're attacked, you can spend a special action and retreat out of the area. You don't have to fight. You can. There's a few things I can't remember, and it's not explaining everything to you, but this. For me, you can use a special action to have a second turn, so you have breakthrough phases. So you can spend a special action, and one area, for example, these blocks here moved into here, they attacked, then they spent a special action, and now that there's a whole bunch of blocks represented by that counter in that area. And similarly with these, they spent a special action then to move another area, so now they've created a pocket for all of these Russian blocks. So you use the special actions to create extra abilities on attack and defence. Then you have final supply determination. Anyone's out of supply there is eliminated, and then it's the allied player turn, and then you move forward a month, 2 months, and that is how the game works. So it's very short and sweet, but the problem with it for me is twofold. One is it's very big for what it's about. It's a very nice system for covering the whole war on the level of, say, Hitler's war or something like that, but maybe a bit more elegant and just done it with a bit more finesse. But it's a huge space that it takes up. Now, so it's kind of like it has that monster game look, but it's a short. It's a swift system. It's not an intricate, complicated system. So I would prefer that the map was half the size and that I could perform the war quickly and easily in a smaller space. Now, part of the reason it's so big is because you've got all these blocks. One thing you can't do solo is it does have fog of war, so I don't know what that unit is. That face to face, that will create a very interesting and different thing that something like Hitler's war would never have. But that necessitates, because you're doing blocks, to perform that, which you kind of need to, without having all like off map holding boxes, and then that would extend the space needed for play hugely. So using blocks means if say all of these blocks and then half of those blocks were in one space together, so the spaces need to be big, so the map needs to be big, so the fog of war dictates blocks dictates a big sized map to cover this whole theatre. Because they decided the units are not meant to be corps or divisions or anything, they're just units, but because they used these instead of some other things. So, for example, you don't have, you don't have. For example, you could have had, say, these lesser pipped blocks could have been a counter for like a battalion, a regiment, say, or a division, and then you could have a counter exactly the same size that could represent a whole army or an army group with, even like 50 pips worth on it, for example, but instead you still got lots of blocks, with each blocks with a maximum of 4 hits on it. So what I'm trying to say is that you could have represented the difference between 1 pip and say 50 pips of strength in an area in a fashion that didn't necessitate using huge blocks. Now it probably would require off-map record keeping, or else you're going to have a stack of chits. You might have to have, say, 5 chits worth 10 each stacked there or something like that, and then use chits for change. So you're either going to have a stack of counters or a huge and a smaller map, or a big map like this and these wooden blocks. So they went with the wooden blocks, fair enough, and it's great for the fog of war, and it does give a pleasing feel to it. But then that comes to the other problem for me with the game, is the fact of the pippage. So for example, you get 12 red and 12 black dice on the side, but I was fighting combats, and that was in the first turn of the game, where I needed to roll 16 or 20 or even 24 dice, because you roll 1 die for each pip. So with this force you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 4, so I was rolling 20 dice for the infantry, and then it was the same again, or near it, or 16 dice for the armour. If I'd rolled them all together, I'd have been rolling 50 or 60 dice, which is madness. It's just mechanically, I find it laborious. Now some people might really enjoy that in face-to-face, because like, wow, what did I get? And but even face-to-face, it's not really that exciting for me. Now, they do offer a way out. You get this table, so you can say, okay, if you're rolling 12 dice and there's no hit bonuses, you can actually just roll 3d6, and that will tell you how many hits you get. So it's kind of averaging out, or creating more of a mean of hits, rather than because potentially if you roll 12 dice, you could get 12 sixes. A hit is on a 6, or you might get nothing. So this strips it out and says you might get nothing, and you might get from 1 to 7 hits. So you'll never actually get the 12 hits, which that for some people that might be the excitement. There's that extreme gamble you can make. So they offer that all the way up to, and that's telling, isn't it? 120 pips might be involved in a combat. That's 120 dice that you'd be rolling if you were not using that. So I thought one way I might do it is I'll just say for every 6 pips that's 1 hit, because you're guaranteed more or less, you know, statistically a hit for 6 pips. Every 1 to 5 pips you will roll that number of dice. And I might continue the game doing that, but I don't know. It's still a lot of you know, calculating and figuring out just for the combat, when, because there's so many pips involved in a combat, instead of combat odds or something like that. And it's just a different way of doing it. It feels a bit more Axis and Allies-y to me, which I think some people would like, but it's just a bit too excessive with all the dice for me. You couldn't do it any other way if you want those swings, because, you know, like I said, if you've got 3 full strength armour units, there's a chance you might cause no damage, or you might cause 12 pips of damage. In between, you're sort of, I suppose statistically, averagely, you would score 6 pips of damage. But it's those wild swings which this affords, and you wouldn't get that with a combat odds results table according to ratios. So I assume that is something that was wanted in the game. And it does say, I didn't mention there was a playbook, and in the playbook there's lots of optional rules, which is wonderful, so you can make the game even more sort of involved and fine-tuned to the specific historical situation that you like. But at the back it does say that with players of equal skill and fortune, the games will always end in a draw. So, which tells me that fortune is quite a big thing in it, because someone might get, you know, or in a crucial battle they might get a wild swing of luck, and then that goes. That's the way it is. But I don't know. I'm rambling a bit, but I think you get the impression that it's the main closer for me on this game is all the dice that you're supposed to roll. I like the cleanness of the system. I just wish that it hadn't been down to 20 odd pips, 20 dice rolled on a combat. There is that option, but I'm still calculating for 20, or in this case like 40 pips. I'm having to check each time, and that's just in one area. And you know, I had 4 areas. That's just the invasion of Barbarossa. You can imagine in other turns where there's even more involved, the turns are just going to mechanically take a long time, because you're counting and rolling dice, counting and rolling dice, counting and rolling dice. It may be that it actually takes not significant. Well, no, I don't think so, because I played some other games like it where a little thing like that, and I think, and that was the Fighting Formations, which is more a tactical game. There's a similar thing in that, a mechanism where it takes only a slight amount more time to figure out than, say, a quick check on a combat odds table. But the point is that aggregated over the course of a game, that small amount of time adds up to a large amount of time that just makes the play time, not that the play time's too long, but the play time has a large proportion of it taken up by something which is, I just don't find involving. So it's unfortunate, and I'm happy I've done this video, because I now feel like I've done the game the justice that I want to do it, and I can take it down and move on to another game. I know this was popular back in the day. I don't hear so much about it now. I wonder if that's because it proved just to be a bit tiresome. I don't know. It had its day, but I don't feel it stuck around. Tell me if you think I'm wrong, and it's still got its grace and its fans, and it's still well played today. But that's it. That's me on Europe Engulfed.